Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
Every now and then we hear about stories where somebody gets fined by a federal agency. And sometimes I'm baffled by how they phrase these things. So the FCC will propose a fine. And I don't know what that means. Does somebody have to second that? or if nobody objects? Or if somebody proposes a fine against me, can I object? Is that how that works? So the FAA, the people who do airplanes, have proposed a $1 million fine for United Airlines over pre-flight safety checks. So this is from CNBC. Leslie Josephs wrote it. And the story is not that lengthy, but as you probably know, before an airplane takes off, whether it's a commercial airliner like a 737 or just a single engine small plane at an airport, the pilots are supposed to do a pre-flight inspection, pre-flight check. And in fact, most airplanes will have a book in the cockpit that you open up and it says, before taking off, here's what you do. And they check all kinds of stuff. And obviously, the bigger the plane, the more checks there are. I know several pilots. One of my brothers is a pilot, and I've flown with him, and I've seen him going through the checks. And it's like, turn this on, turn this off, make sure this is okay. And you go through all these things. And you also get out of the plane and walk around it and do a visual check on all of the flight control surfaces and so on. And so you go through all these checks every time you fly. And sometimes I suspect that the people who are flying planes get a little lazy and go, do we have to do all these checks every single time? So the FAA said Monday it's proposing a more than $1.1 million penalty against United Airlines for allegedly failing to perform required fire system safety checks on its 777s. Lucky sevens. The FAA alleged that in 2018, United removed a fire system warning check from a pre-flight checklist and operated 102,000 flights with Boeing 777s from June 2018 through April 2021 without making sure they were in airworthy condition, properly maintained for operation, according to a letter from the FAA on Monday to the CEO of United. And CNBC has a copy of the letter, so they know that that's what it says. So there were 102,000 flights after they allege that they removed that part of the checklist from taking place. The carrier said it changed its pre-flight checklist in 2018 to account for redundant built-in checks performed automatically by the 777. So they're actually saying this thing can check itself. The plane says it's okay. And they said that was reviewed and approved by the FAA at the time. So the question is, was it? Because I would assume before you make a major change like that, you'd get it in writing. So if you ask them, can we do this? And they say yes, you get that in writing. If it's not in writing, you're in a world of hurt because it could end up with a $1 million fine. In 2021, the FAA informed United that United's maintenance program called for the pre-flight check by pilots. Once confirmed, United immediately updated its procedures. United said it will review the proposed fine. So they're going to review it. $1 million. Any thoughts on that? So one followed by a whole bunch of zeros. Anything else? I'm not quite sure what you do besides that. I suppose they're actually going to spend more time reviewing the allegations underlying the fine. The inspection is required in the maintenance specifications manual. So removal of the check resulted in United's failure to perform the required check and the operation of aircraft that did not meet airworthiness requirement, the FAA said in a statement. So they're concerned that as this check never got done, how do we know these planes were safe to fly? And FAA says you wouldn't know. And the airline says, well, the plane checked itself somehow. United had 96 of these Boeings as of the end of 2021, making up about 11% of its total fleet, according to a securities filing. And I know there's going to be people out there who know much, much more about airplanes, especially Boeing 777s than I do. But I think I know what they're saying here. And many systems on airplanes are redundant. And there are things on the airplane that do check certain other things, okay? So there'll be warning lights to let you know if something malfunctions. But the question always is if that warning light is out, does that mean that the thing's not malfunctioning? Or could the warning light be malfunctioning? That's always the problem. And so to have that much faith in your equipment might be misplaced. But then again, I'm not exactly sure how complex the fire system warning check was as part of the pre-flight. And so I believe, I could be wrong on this, but I believe that the pre-flight checklist can be done by several people. It doesn't have to be just the pilot. I'm trying to think if I've ever seen a pilot get out and walk around his airplane at the airport. I'm not sure if I've ever seen that on a big airplane. Like I said, I've done it with my brother, and I know a couple other pilots, and I've flown with them, and the same thing. We walk out the airplane, and they grab the booklet out of the plane that has a checklist in it. They open it up, and they start going through the checklist. And at one point, we're walking around the plane, checking all the surfaces, checking the tires, testing the fuel to make sure the fuel is not contaminated. And it is a lengthy process. And I was struck by that the first time I flew with my brother, about how much time he spends checking the plane out before he takes off. And I remember at the time going, you do this every time? And he goes, yeah, we have to. And if you think about what's at stake once you're up in the air, it makes sense. But when you think about a big old airplane like a Boeing 777, even more is at stake. So again, it's a fire system warning check, but United says, we ran this by the FAA and they said it was okay. And the FAA says, we don't remember that. We are proposing $1 million fine. So, if the FAA approved it, I'd back United on this one. But the real question is, I think, I'm pretty certain, and again, pilots in the audience, please jump in here and explain this to me. I'm pretty certain that the pre-flight checklist is put together by the airplane manufacturer. So I think Boeing would be the one who'd say, here is the pre-flight checklist. This is what we recommend for people flying our plane. And so if it's in the pre-flight checklist from Boeing, I'd be surprised if the FAA said, oh, that's okay, skip that step. I don't know. So again, if you're a pilot, you know these things, jump in and explain them because I'm curious about it. But like I said, I know pilots, and I've watched them do the pre-flight check. And then you climb inside, go through everything else, and then, of course, you open up the window and yell, clear prop. So there you go. George and Brett sent this to me, but not George Brett. George and Brett both sent this. Leslie Joseph wrote that for CNBC. FAA proposes a more than $1 million fine on United over pre-flight safety checks that they say were skipped, but United says they were allowed to, or something else. Don't know. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Lehto's Law. Can you remember who you were before the world told you who you should be?